everyone, and I hope all of you are good anywhere you are around the world. So I'm Farid Safari, and today I'm here for presenting the talk about biochar and hydrochar from algae. So I am researcher in Clean Energy Research Laboratory in University of Ontario Institute of Technology, and which has a new brand name as Ontario Tech University. So you see the both names on top of my presentation. And I am also chair for ASME Ontario section, which is American Society of Mechanical Engineering for the province of Ontario in Canada.
Can you go in presentation mode? Sorry.
Okay, 1 second. Is it good now?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. So let's begin. Probably you know that we have different kinds of biomass. So as feedstock for biorefinery and biomass conversion processes, we basically have classes of feedstocks, let's say. And we have first generation of biomass or feedstocks as edible biomass, like sugar, starch, and etc. These biomasses has some problems which are high interference with the food chain. They're highly dependent on land and water, and basically their use are already established in industrial scale. They have been used for ethanol production and other uses. Then when we came forward, like in years, we have second generation of biomass, which are agricultural waste mainly, and municipal solid waste. And these biomasses are better in terms of their less interference with food chain, and they're still dependent on land and water use, because we need some land to grow as an agricultural sector, and water consumption during the growth of the biomass. So that's why we moved forward and we looked at other kinds of biomass. As third generation of biomass, we have algal biomass or biomass algae. So these biomasses promises us some very good aspects. One of the very important one is no interference or very low interference with food chain, and very less water use and land use, as you see, slightly dependent on land and water, very slightly, and some other aspects that we will talk about in the talk. Because of their structure, they're more cellulosic and much easier for conversion. And also, recently, there are some research going on fourth generation of biomass. There are generally modified algae and some microorganisms. So these have no interference with food chain and no dependence on land and water. But the research on the fourth generation of biomass are very in a research stage and in early development stage. For third generation, in some parts of the world, there are some biorefineries developed based on algae, and for second generation, some processes are already industrially established. So as we see the processes and these biomass feedstocks, we can classify somehow the third generation biomass as midterm approach. So where we have near term as first and second generation, midterm and long term as fourth generation of biomass when we look at the whole concept of bioconversion processes. But what are the advantages aspects of algal biomass? So when we look at algae, we see that over 28 million tons of marine biomass promises renewable environmentally sourced for production of biofuel and chemicals. This kind of biomass, as we said, has no competition with food production and doesn't interfere with food and water supply. The low content of hemicellulose and about zero content of lignin promises faster and easier hydrolysis for gas and liquid production. So in the next slide, we will look at the biomass structure and what that means, that why lower lignin basically promises faster and easier hydrolysis. And the char from algae promises some applications as catalyst and electrodes and etc. in energy industry. So basically the last one that I'm mentioning here is the one that we most focus in this talk. So we have done some experiments on the application of algal biochar and hydrochar on in basically the gasification processes and pyrolysis processes, and we saw their catalytic effect. So basically, we look at the last one more in details. And before we go ahead, just a very simple basically definition and what is the difference between biochar and hydrochar. That's a very important thing when we go ahead, because in some places we use the word biochar and in some places we use the word hydrochar. So basically biochar is the char, the solid product of process when it is produced in non-aqueous medium. Basically, there is no water or steam around in the medium. But hydrochar is the solid product that is produced in aqueous medium, like in hydrothermal carbonization or HTC, as you may know, or hydrothermal gasification or HTG. We will look at those processes in details in the in talk. So this is about biochar and hydrochar. And yes, as we said, we have biomass, like every kind of biomass, almost every kind of biomass has these three biopolymers in their structure. So if we take a look at the structure, remember we said that the low lignin and high availability of cellulose in algal biomass in algae promises its faster and easier hydrolysis. By that mean, we look at the biomass structure. So cellulose is basically a linear polymer, contains of glucose, which are bonded together. Hemicellulose is like very similar to cellulose with the difference in the bondage and etc. And lignin is very different. Lignin is an amorphous, basically structure, including some aromatic compounds like phenols, catechols, and etc. So this kind of structure is very hard to cleavage and very hard to destruct basically during the bioconversion processes. So that lignin structure usually hinders gas production and conversion during gasification and pyrolysis for gas and liquid production. So that's why we usually we see in our experiments and in the literature that more availability of cellulose favors higher gas yield or favors the more destruction of the biomass structure. So that's one aspect of the promising aspects of algae. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we did in our experiments, and let's see what can be the possible application of this algal hydrochar. So algal hydrochar as a catalyst for promotion of hydrogen in gasification processes. So basically we tested macroalgae from Caspian Sea named Cladophora glomerata. This Cladophora is native to Caspian Sea, that area. So we collected the samples and we brought to the laboratory, and basically we dried and we used in our reactor for gasification with the objective of hydrogen production. So as you see, the thing that we observed in our experiments was that the char produced from this process. So basically this process for hydrogen production, usually they considered in the literature the char from this process as a waste and something to avoid. But we had some char in the reactor and we tested the char to see what's the structure and what can be the possible application. And we saw the unique properties of the hydrochar which was porous and rich in alkaline and alkaline earth metals. And basically, of course, if we can use it as catalyst, is with lower price and lower carbon footprint. So again, we wanted to test the algae for hydrogen production. We have different hydrogen production processes for from biomass. So we have biological conversion and thermochemical conversion. So the most promising way of converting biomass into hydrogen that are recently very highly attractive in research is supercritical water gasification, when we basically convert the biomass in a supercritical water medium. So what that means by supercritical water, it means that it's supercritical water is water in temperatures of higher than 374 degrees of Celsius and pressures of more than 22 megapascal. So if pressure and temperature goes at the same time beyond this point, we call it supercritical water. So this supercritical water gasification has some advantages over other thermochemical methods of conversion of biomass, which is lower temperature, higher hydrogen yield, favorable for integration for power and hydrogen, and able to convert wet biomass. This is very important because this technology promises us the conversion of wet biomass like wastewater and algal biomass. So it's a very good process selection for conversion of algae into hydrogen, let's say. So that was our experimental setup, batch reactor, stainless steel batch reactor, which we used, and basically we immersed it in the molten salt bath, and when the temperature and pressure reach the point beyond supercritical condition, we wait for like some reaction time, and the reaction time is optimized during the process, and then we see and we collect the product, and we use a gas chromatograph for basically the gas analysis to see what gases we are, and also after we can collect the solid product as hydrochar. So the char from this hydrothermal conversion is called hydrochar. So we call it algal hydrochar from hydrothermal gasification. So as I said, you see this is the supercritical region, the temperature and pressure, and very promising aspects you see here. In the supercritical condition of water, we have lower density, lower ionic product, lower dielectric constant, and higher miscibility and lower polarity. So what happens? The hydrogen bonds between water molecules in the supercritical and transcritical condition of water gets very loose. So somehow these bonds are disappearing and emerging and disappearing. And this promises free radical reaction and some harsh condition that promises the very good distraction of the biomass compound and compound. So that's why transcritical and supercritical water media is a very good condition for biomass destruction and gas and liquid production. And and there are some research that also even saying in this one is in the Journal of German Chemical Society that is mentioning that even supercritical water is not hydrogen bonded recently, but usually they call it it's somehow not and bonded or not bonded. So the reaction pathway of algae in supercritical water gasification, as you see, cellulose, hemicellulose, lignin. Going through the process, this temperature and pressure, and we have glucose, xylose, and phenolic compounds mostly from lignin, and then we have 5-hydroxymethyl-furfural as a medium, and then that in presence of good catalyst converts into gaseous products, which are mainly containing carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, hydrogen, and methane. But this is the process for gas production. As I mentioned, we collected the hydrochar from this project, from this experiment, which is algal hydrochar, and we experimented it. So in this picture, at the right side of the picture, you see the algal hydrochar, and you see here you see the raw cladophora glomerata, and you see not porous structure, and in the hydrochar here, this should be hydrochar. You see the porous structure with the matrix of pores that are regular matrix of pores, and you see the size of pores are like around something between 100 and 500 nanometers. So this porous structure is very good and promises high surface area and promises basically catalytic effect in the process. And in the left side, you see the aggregate. This is a wheat straw hydrochar. And as you see in the wheat straw hydrochar, you see the bigger scale of pores. Here you have like the scale of pores as like 5 micrometer or something like that. So this smaller pore size, and at the same time, richness in alkaline and alkaline earth metal promises catalytic activity in the process for more hydrogen production in our process. So basically you see here cladophora glomerata hydrochar and wheat straw hydrochar and the right side in the table. And as you see here, you see the calcium, potassium, and magnesium and sodium. When we see these alkaline and alkaline earth metals, we see the higher accumulation of basically these metals in hydrochar from cladophora glomerata or the algae, the hydrochar from algae. So that means these compounds in the literature are proven to accelerate or improve the process for hydrogen production by catalyzing the water gas shift process, which is the secondary gas process which turns carbon monoxide and water into carbon dioxide and hydrogen, and also this process catalyzing the process for the higher destruction of biomass compound, as we know. So the higher content of alkaline and alkaline earth metals in specifically algal biomass and algal biochar and hydrochar promises us good catalytic activity for promotion of hydrogen and promotion of also other compounds, more specifically hydrogen. And you see in the figure the higher hydrogen yield in the green column, which is for the time that we use algal hydrochar as catalyst. There is also some demonstration of this supercritical water gasification and a scale-up version. You see in the photo, this is in China. And also this time we have biochar from cladophora glomerata, means that the char that is produced from pyrolysis. So the char produced from hydrothermal gasification called hydrochar, but this one is called biochar because the biochar is produced, the char is produced in non-aqueous medium. So at this time we again did the same thing. Like basically we saw that, and then we looked at the pyrolysis experiment to see if in pyrolysis we observed kind of the same thing. And yes, the char from pyrolysis was also porous. This is the experimental setup for the pyrolysis process in a quartz reactor. And then we saw kind of the same structure with different pore sizes somehow. And we saw that the biochar from pyrolysis processes of cladophora glomerata macroalgae is also porous and is also rich in alkaline and alkaline earth metals. This richness is because they live and grow in like basically salty lakes and sea. So that's why they absorb these minerals during the growth of their plants. And then in the char, we observe the alkaline and alkaline earth metals more than agricultural waste and other like biomasses. And this is the result from the pyrolysis when we applied the basically biochar catalyst in the process. So we returned the biochar to the process, and we saw the promotion of hydrogen gas in gaseous products, and also phenolic. You see this one, the second one, acids, phenols, ketones. In phenols products, we see the improvement in phenol production, promotion of phenol production. This work also published in Bioresource Technology. The other application of Algal biochar is electrode for lithium-ion batteries. So basically, as electrodes. So basically, if we produce the magnetic biochar, we can use it for basically electrochemical applications, such as electrodes for lithium-ion batteries or supercapacitors. So my colleague also investigated the algal biochar for electrode application, and as you see, the A and B are non-magnetic biochar, and C and D are magnetic biochar when the process is catalyzed by iron. So that's the difference, and it gives the biochar some magnetic properties and electrochemical properties. And you can observe the difference between magnetic biochar and raw biochar here, with higher with the higher surface area of magnetic biochar in the red line at the A and B at the top, and also pore diameters, smaller pore diameters of magnetic biochar in red in the top left. And in two figures in the bottom of the screen, you see the voltage current graph, which shows the electrochemical performance of for different cycles of the battery in when the magnetic biochar is used. So A is for non-magnetic and B for magnetic biochar. Okay, so we saw these applications, and as I conclude, I think the time is running up and we are going to the end almost. So as concluding remarks, I can mention that algal biomass has great potential for energy applications such as hydrogen production, biocarbon production, and etc. The char derived from algal biomass has unique properties, favors its application as catalyst or support, mentioning that the biochar or hydrochar can be directly used as catalyst, or we can use as catalyst support and impregnated, or by any method that we want, we can use other catalysts like nickel, like ruthenium, and other catalysts on the basis or on the support of biochar or hydrochar, since they have high surface area and they're based on carbon, and also electrodes and supercapacitors. High surface area of porous algal biochar and hydrochar and rich content of AAEMs or alkaline earth metals promises its catalytic activity during pyrolysis and gasification processes. Algal biochar and hydrochar are recommended for further investigation for applications in energy and chemical industries. We see unique properties of biochar and hydrochar in the recent time, and they're promising very good basically application in also soil amendment, not to be forgotten. So basically, I didn't investigate this application, but I'm sure that the biochar and hydrochar from algae has unique properties to be also used in agricultural sector as well. Thank you, and any question and comments, I will be pleased to answer.
Thank you very much, Farid. Very interesting to hear about algae biochar. So if anyone has a question, please write in the chat, or you can also unmute yourself and ask directly. It's sometimes faster. So my first question would be, What's the yield for hydrothermal gasification biochar? So how much biochar you end up with? Hydrochar, more or less. I think you're muted.
Yeah, okay. So you mean the ratio between the hydrochar and the biomass itself that we use, the algae?
No, if you do a hydrothermal gasification, right, how much biochar hydrochar you end up with? So what's the yield?
Oh yeah. So the yield basically here is small. Like it's not too much. Like so basically I can say not by the number, it's very low, but the yield of a hydrochar from hydrothermal gasification is lower than the yield of biochar from pyrolysis gasification. So that's why, because in the hydrothermal gasification, we have more destruction of biomass into gaseous products, not into solid and liquid products. But in pyrolysis, we have more liquid products basically, and also some biochar. But the yield of hydrochar in hydrothermal gasification is very low, but that's very low yield. We just experimented it and we saw it's a good, it has a unique property.
Yeah. I think Hassan Shah or
yeah. My question is there any commercial plant for this, or just it's on small scale at the moment?
Yeah. Thank you, Hassan. Good question. So this process, yeah, the char from hydrothermal gasification is in very early stage. Basically, the work what we did and published in Bioresource Technology 2016 was one of the first kind of this work. I mean, like before that, usually they wanted to get rid of the char from hydrothermal gasification. I didn't see any paper before that that investigated the char from hydrothermal gasification. So that was kind of the first early stage times in research that we observed that. But after that, there are lots of research now, and the basically in commercial stage is only in very early development. Some research centers around the world are working on that. Specifically, those research centers that have already scaled up hydrothermal gasification plants. So they investigate now on also hydrochar. But for the pyrolysis, I think it's in a more advanced level. So I mean, it's very early stage in hydrothermal gasification, the application of algal hydrochar. But for algal biochar in pyrolysis, maybe in bench scale or something, we have something around the world I have observed. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much.
Because we are quite late in time, I will ask the next two questions, and if you have time after the presentation to answer the other questions in the chat, that would be great. So the first question was about the costs of hydrochar. So if you have any actual numbers, or if you have looked at the economic efficiency of this?
Basically, we didn't, and I haven't seen yet that they have like looked in detail in the economics of hydrochar production from hydrothermal gasification process. But as I said, it was a waste of the process usually. And now if we turn it to advantage, it will be definitely cost beneficial, because before that we just threw it away. But that's why the problem was we tested agricultural waste for hydrothermal gasification, and the char from agricultural waste didn't promise catalytic activity because of low content of alkaline and alkaline earth metals. But for the case of algae, we saw that and it promises. But it will be definitely cost beneficial because it's a byproduct of the process, and we use it as a benefit as a catalyst. Yeah.
And the last question that we can answer directly. So would hydrogen energy fuel cells be applicable here?
Oh yeah, that's a very good question. So in terms of hydrogen economy, so in 10 to 15 years, we are moving towards like that's how Hydrogen Council, if you look at the website, it's an initiative of very big CEOs that initiated like 1-2 years ago, now comprised of 123 big companies. So they're looking at they're predicting that in 10 to 15 years, we gradually moved into hydrogen infrastructure. So for hydrogen fuel cells, we can say like in 10 to 15 years, we see them really cost competitive in some countries, cost competitive with fossil fuel based like transportation and their electric cars and etc. So hydrogen cars maybe in 10 to 15 years get close to other vehicles, if that's your question. And it's highly dependent on renewable electricity and other stuff.
Okay, thank you very much. You got a couple of other questions, but I think we are quite on time now to start with the second one. So thank you very much for
No problem. Yeah, thank you all. Thank you for all listening, and thank you for yourself for inviting.